Please welcome back Be'eshel and Carlin Romano to the Free Library of Philadelphia.
So let's talk about the book first. You say in the book that through all the adventures, all the missions you've been on, Bangladesh, Darfur, so many others, there's always been this Jewish part of you that's evolving, that's reacting, and so on. You talk about this at great length in the book, but can you say what kind of Jewish person is Bernard-Henri Lévy today? He's secular, he's not secular, committed to Israel, not committed to Israel. How do you, and I know it's difficult when you've written a whole book about it, but a thumbnail of how you see yourself as a Jew today.
I don't know if I see myself so much. And as I say in the book, it is certainly not the most important thing for a Jewish writer, to see himself, to define himself, to search his own identity. This, for me, precisely, is not the key point. The key point of being a Jew, this is what at least I try to demonstrate in the book, is to know who is the other, is to go to the other, is to try to phrase and express the otherness, and to try to make himself the hostage of the other. This is what it is to be a Jew. I am not sure to be a good Jew. I'm not sure to be always a Jew. I'm not sure to be an enough committed Jew, but what I'm sure of is that this is what haunts me when I write, when I work, when I commit myself. Now, I can try nevertheless to give you a few replies. Committed to Israel or not? Of course I am committed to Israel, and even unconditionally to Israel, as I don't mean the politics of Israel, with which, as every Israeli and as every Jew in the world, I can disagree with, but Israel as itself, the essence of Israel, the principle of Israel, I am unconditionally committed to it. I am a secular Jew. Am I a secular Jew? I don't know what you mean by that, but what is true, and it is, I think, the last chapter of the book, I think that what is required from a Jew is less to believe than to understand, is less to mix himself in a sort of mystic contemplation with the Almighty, than to try to question, to study, and to know. There is a title of one book of Emmanuel Levinas, which is in French, De Dieu qui vient à l'idée, about God who comes to the idea. And I think this title expresses not so bad what I feel. There is another quote of a great Jewish thinker much before Emmanuel Levinas, the Gaon of Vilnius. And the Gaon of Vilnius, who is one of the most important masters of pre-modern Judaism, he says, if I had to choose between a lazy Jew who believes unconditionally, a lazy Jew who believes unconditionally, and a working Jew studying a lot, devoted to the texts, holding firm the texts and the words as a way to support the world, but doubting of, in terms of creed, the Gaon of Vilnius says that he prefers the second one. He prefers the Jew who study but doubts better than the Jew who is lazy but who believes. So in this term, I am certainly a secular Jew. Yeah.
And you?
But I don't study enough. I am far under the real vocation and call for a Jew as I try to express it.
You have a line later in the book that suggests that Judaism is a kind of inclination toward intelligence. And you, at least in the English translation,
but it is a good one.
Yeah.
It is a good one.
But you mentioned Levinas a lot, and you say at the beginning of the book that you're returning now to questions that kind of occupied you 40 years ago. Can you say something about the impact of Levinas on you? He had a great concern with the other and the relationship to the other.
First of all, inclination to intelligence. I saw that it provoked a certain hilarity, but I'm not sure you are right. With all the respect which I have for the Christians and the Christianity, and respect, a true respect, Christianity brought to the world the greatest piece of arts. Christianity brought to the world the definition of the individual as it is today. Christianity probably built the definition of the human, the sort of human to whom some human rights can be applied. So Christianity is really the soil and the cement of the culture which all of us, a lot of us, and all of us share. But there is one of the biggest difference between Judaism and Christianity is that there is a moment when, in the relationship with the transcendence, in the relationship with God, there is a moment when it is ordered to the Christian not to understand. When it is ordered to the Christian to stop understanding, to jump in the emptiness of the mystery of the divine, and to bet. This is what Blaise Pascal says in his famous Bet. This is what Racine said in so many of his tragedies. This moment when the intelligence is required to stop and to leave place to the bet or the creed. This gesture is absolutely unconceivable for a Jew. A Jew would never jump, would never bet, would never stop questioning, studying, and trying to understand and to grasp few new bits of truth. So when I say this commission to intelligence, that's what I mean. In Islam, you may have a tendency, despite the existence of the hadiths at the beginning of Islam, despite a still living tradition of commentary, but there is a tendency to say that the word is untouchable, that what a worshipper is committed to do is to recitate the word. Again, this attitude is opposite to what is required from a Jew. What I owe to Levinas is, for example, this idea. Levinas had taught me many things, among which the fact that to be a Jew meant to give as much importance, if not more, to the Talmud than to the Torah. If Levinas did teach me something, is that in the Torah, in the words of the Torah, the spirit is implied and folded, that the wings of the spirit are folded. And that what happens in the Talmud is the unfolding of the wings of the spirit. And this only happens in the Talmud. This is the lesson of Levinas. The lesson of Levinas is also this idea, we started like this, Carlin, a few minutes ago, that the main question of the Jew, that to be a Jew is not to be related to oneself, not either to a closed community, but that being a Jew means to be related in some precise forms to the rest of humanity. This is very important for Levinas. And I say at the point of the book, this is not Levinas, but this is one of the ways in which I feel to be faithful to the heritage of Levinas. I comment the verse and the commentary of Rashi about the verse, saying that every word of the Torah has to be considered as if it had a face, and as if it have not one face but 70 faces. Very important quote of Rashi, that you have to read every word of the Talmud as if it had 70 faces. 70 is not any number, it is the number of the number of the nations. So it means that every nation, every existing group of humans has to and is enabled to and is able to and is entitled to find its face in every verse of the Torah. This is what Judaism says. This is what being a Jew in the sense of Emmanuel Levinas means. To express a word which is an operator of subjectivation for every nation, for every human, for every singularity. This is what I believe is to be a Jew according to Levinas.
Very well explained. I want to ask you about a very lively passage later in the book when you say, imagine a Muslim Talmud. I liked that passage. And you have a really complicated and subtle view of different elements of Islam and the way they're in conflict today. Can you say, would that really be possible? And where do you feel the enlightened Islam that you say you've been seeking for can be found?
Number one, I believe, and I say in the book, that the biggest stake of our time, the biggest political clash of our epoch is inside Islam, the battle between radical Islam and enlightened Islam. This, for our generations, is probably the biggest issue. Who will prevail, the radical Islam or the enlightened Islam? The Islam who believes itself to be enemy to democracy, human rights, liberties, or the one who thinks, the Islam who thinks that there is a way to make the word of the Quran matching with this principle of liberal modernity. This is the fight of today. The other thing which I say in this chapter of the book is that if the Muslim first and their friends second, which is us, want the democratic tendency to prevail, there is one absolute condition, which is that the existing, though strongly repressed tradition of commentary inside Islam grow and flourish. You cannot see the democracy, the human rights, the reign of the law prevail in a culture when it is believed that the truth was said once and forever in the perfect and pure terms in which nothing can be changed. One thing which is a sort of counterpoison to intolerance and to fanaticism in Judaism is Talmud. As you know, if you are a reader of the Talmud, you know that there is no one proposal, no one truth, no one opinion which cannot be the object of a contestation, of a complication, or of a reversal. This is the principle of Talmud. This incredible and which has been considered so often as annoying taste of the Jews, of the Jewish scholars, to complicate the things, to make them more complex. This is the spirit of Talmud, and this is an incredible vaccination, an incredible antidote against the closed truth, the definitive opinions, and against the idea that my opinion or yours has to be imposed because it is the definitive one. There is no definitive truth. Truth is always on process. Truth is always revisable. You can always revise a truth. So this is what I mean in the chapter you are mentioning. What will make prevail the human rights, the democracy in Islam? What will make the inheritors of Commander Massoud in Afghanistan, the partisans of the Muslims of Bosnia, which will make prevail the Islam in Morocco against the intolerant Islam, will be the refreshing, the renewal, and the relaunching of a tradition of commentary inside the Islamic world. This idea of unfolding the wings of the spirit, which is a Jewish idea, can be applied, should be, and I think that some of the best spirits in the Muslim world today long for this possibility to unfold the wings of the spirit.
Can you say something about how what you just described connects to the Kurds and the Peshmerga? Because it seems that you are very admiring, that you think that's one of the places where perhaps this is happening, can happen.
Yes. All my life, I tried to find the traces of this enlightened Islam, of this Islam welcoming the otherness and this alterity. I searched for it when I was 20 years old in Bangladesh. I looked for it when I was a little older in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I looked for it in so many other places. What is true, what Carlin Romano is alluding to, is that I met recently, I met that long time ago, but I met in a definite way. I committed myself to this meeting, an incredible people who are the Kurds. Incredible, first of all, because they are valiant, they are brave, they were for a long time, since the last weeks, the only one to confront face to face ISIS in the most incredibly brave way. I devoted to that a film called Peshmerga, who is going to be screened next week at the New York Jewish Film Festival at the Lincoln Center. Welcome. So they are incredible for that, because they are brave, because they are modest, unnamed, anonymous, true heroes. And I like heroism. I like greatness. I like when an ordinary woman or man is suddenly taller than herself or than himself. This is what happens on the front line among the Kurds. But what is also admirable, and what made this strong encounter, which appeared for me recently, is that they are Muslims, sometimes great worshippers, devoted to Islam, but an Islam which considers as an article of faith the openness, who considers the rest, the other creeds, and the protection of the other creeds as an obligation, and who considers in particular the Judaism and the Jews in a brotherly way. I was, and I said that in the book, I spent a few weeks around Mosul. Mosul, which old name was Nineveh, the place where Jonas goes, Nineveh, is called today Mosul. So I was for weeks and weeks around Mosul, and by the way, more recently inside Mosul for another movie. And what was so moving is the insistence, the pride with which my Kurdish companion wanted to show me the humble, nearly invisible traces of Jewish memory in their cities or villages. In the Middle East, I don't know any other country, any other area, frankly, where some commanders take you after hours of a difficult road to show you a nearly vanishing grave, which was the grave of an ancient, saint or not, old Jew. This is very emotional for me, and this is a sign. And I remember in the movie, which will be screened next week in the Lincoln Center, there is even this incredible scene in the Middle East of a Kurdish, therefore Muslim, commander driving me to a little city called Acre in order to show me as a real place of memory, as a real place of pride, as if the very spirit of this city was embedded here, the birthplace, the place of birth of a former minister of defense of the state of Israel. In Iraq, Kurdistan, I found a group of Peshmerga who took me to this old house where was born, incidentally, a man who has become 40 years later, the minister of Israel. So to consider this link with Israel as a source not of shame, but of pride, to consider this brotherness, this being a brother with an Israeli politician, as a source of, as a food for the Kurdish spirit and not as a deprivation, this is so rare. So the two things, this braveness, bravoure, and this commitment to otherness, tolerance to alterity, and especially to Jewishness, it is true, make the Kurds, for me, very special people. And that is one of the reasons why I spend so much time and so many pages of this book trying to understand that.
I think I understand better now what we were talking about at our meal, why you were not happy with that mention in the New York Times that suggested because you were a Jew doing a documentary in Mosul, immediately they reacted against you. The very opposite of what you've just told us about the Kurds, the different group, I know.
Not the Kurds.
Not the Kurds, the Iraqi army.
Yeah, because today, this is another story.
I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Just one word to clear the thing. Today happens the Battle of Mosul, which is very important because it will be, when Mosul will be taken, the Islamic State has two capitals, Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq. Today, Battle of Mosul. There has been a sort of division of the tasks, of the works, between the Kurds and the Iraqi, according to an agreement made by the coalition and especially by the Americans. It is the task of the Kurds to open the gates of Mosul and the task of the Iraqis to enter in Mosul and to occupy the city. And it is true that there was 3 weeks ago, an article in the New York Times saying that the Iraqis, the Shia Iraqis, the Shia the majority of Shia composing the Iraqi army, embedded me and my crew inside Mosul. They allowed us to film great shots of the liberation of Mosul happening today, but that they suddenly discovered I was a Jew, and opposite to what I just told you about the Kurds, considered this discovery as a catastrophe, considered being a Jew as a great sin, and decided not only to close the gates of the city to me, but to close it to, this is what the New York Times reported, to all journalists. The article of the New York Times, 22 of December, you can Google it, said, gave allowed an Iraqi Shia general to speak, and he said, why did we close the city of Mosul and the battlefield to all journalists? Because we discovered that among the bunch of journalists, there is one who sneaked in, who is called Bernard-Henri Lévy, who is a Jew linked to Israel. This is exactly the sort of political provocation which is, I think, unconceivable among the Kurds, and unconceivable in the enlightened Islam for which I battle since I am a teenager.
Let me take you, before we go to questions from the audience, just to something not quite in line with politics, but more the history of France. I think a lot of people here wonder about the situation of Judaism and Jews in France today. One of my favorite things about the book is the way you talk about the intertwined history of France and French culture and Judaism, when you talk about Rashi and the wonderful early French, the local French that is interspersed in his Hebrew. You also have a long section on Proust and thinking about Proust as a Jewish writer. How do you see things today? You begin one chapter by saying, must the Jews leave France? You more or less say no, it's not that urgent, not that dangerous, but could you give us a sense of the bigger picture?
The emergency is not for the Jews to leave France, it is for the anti-Semites to leave France. This is the emergency. This is what I say. And I don't say it as a provocation, I say this as as more or less all that I say in this book in a very calm, cold, and apodictic way. For me, it is clear that if you compare the way in which the anti-Semites of today, including the anti-Semitic part of the National Front, hate France, they hate France, they debuild France, they wish for the demolition of the French spirit. If you compare this to the way in which the French Jews built France, contributed to the constitution of France, it is very clear that if someone has to leave, it is not the Jews. What I say, when I mention the contribution of the Jews to the constitution of France, I mean it in the deepest sense, constitution of France. I think that the Jews take a great part in the building of the French language. The French which I speak better than my English, I must tell you. The French which I speak today has been in part invented or put into motion at least by a Jew, and not an ordinary Jew, probably one of the biggest master of Judaism ever, who happened to be French, and who was Rashi. Rashi took a decisive part in the constitution of the French, which is itself the French, one of the constitutive stones of the French identity. When I say the part taken by the Jews to constitution of France, I mean also the way in which we French consider the very idea of republic, the idea of the republic, which the French contributed, by the way, to conceptualize for the whole world, with the English, with the Americans. The French idea of republic owes a lot, again, this is my demonstration, to a Jewish pattern, to the pattern of the ancient Hebrew kingdom. When you read the text of the inventors of the French idea of the social contract, you see that the paradigm is not, as it is often said, the Roman Republic or the Greek city, but it is the kingdom of Hebrews. It's a fact. It is not a wish. It is not a thesis. It is a fact which has been often buried and repressed by the French Revolution, who had a strong interest as saying the things otherwise, for many reasons. So the builders of the idea of general will, of social contract, of republic, of democracy in France were influenced, inspired, haunted by the Jewish model. And third, Proust, which was just mentioned by Carlin, there was a moment in the French, because a nation is constituted by a language, by a political pattern, and by a literature. What makes a country is let's say very roughly, the people and the writers. These are the two poles of the birth and the building and the history of a nation, the people and the writers. There is a moment in the French history, beginning of the 20th century, when the French literature was close to collapse, close to silence, close to lose itself in the sands of scarcity, vanguardian tentatives, and a sort of frozen state of literature. It is the time of Mallarmé, the time of Valéry, the time of Dada literature, the pre-surrealist, and so on. And what I think, and what again I think I demonstrate, is that if French literature revived, if French literature was re-irrigated, if it was rehydrated, it is thanks to a French writer who happened to be a secret but very prominent Jew, secret because of the time and prominent because of the vibrancy of the Jewish letter in him, whose name was Marcel Proust. Marcel Proust reinvented, relaunched the game of the French literature till now. If there is still a French literature, therefore a French nation, it is in part because of Marcel Proust. And if Marcel Proust must be credited for that, my demonstration is that it is because he was a Jew. So at this stage also, so from Rachy to Marcel Proust, going through the inventors of the social contract, Jean Bodin and others, the genius of Judaism was here at some of the most crucial rendezvous of France with itself. That is another reason why I tell you that if somebody has to leave, it is certainly not the inheritors of Rachy and of Marcel Proust.
I think your position on that is quite clear. No, so.
Merci, bonsoir. J'ai deux questions. First, in French, the title is Esprit de Judaisme. In English, it's the genius of Judaism. Did you have to think about this? Because esprit translates more as spirit. Did you want it to be genius rather than spirit? Was there a reason? Was it a thought, or is it an afterthought? And the second question, which maybe you don't want to deal with, is, where is moderate, humanistic Islam in France and in Europe today? Or has terror silenced moderate Islam?
About the title, it's true that the title is different in France and in French and in English. It's due to my American publisher, but I accepted it. Genius of Judaism comes from a chapter of the book, an important chapter, about a great French book which I admire since always, which is a book of Chateaubriand called Le Génie du Christianisme, the genius of Christianity. Chateaubriand, who is a great French writer, one of the biggest, and Chateaubriand, who is probably one of the rare French great writer who was not so much anti-Semite, and who, when he made his long trip, his long journey, I think it is the title of one of his books, from Paris to Jerusalem, when he arrived in Jerusalem and when he saw the old, poor, wicked Jews of this time, he identified them with his own family, with the families of the other French aristocrats who had been kicked out of France by French Revolution and who were reduced at the state of exiled in other European countries. So there is in Chateaubriand this idea of two twin peoples, the French aristocrats and the poor Jews of Jerusalem. There is this idea of une double seigneurie, a twofold seigneurie, to be a lordry, how do you say that, seigneurie? a twofold being a lord, which always moved me to the bottom of my being. And there is a moment in the book where I try to understand what Chateaubriand did when he published Genius of Christianity, when he decided to prove in a France where Christianism was dearly forbidden, censored just after French Revolution, he wanted to prove that, and he did, that Christianity was number one, handsome, and number two, ethic. That there was a relationship between Christianity and the beauty of the world on one side, and the morality on the other one. And this is more or less what, with my little means, I try to do with Judaism. I try to prove in this book that there is a relationship between Judaism and beauty and art, by the way, opposite to the cliché, to the commonplace, according to which there would be a sort of iconoclasm, a refusal of image, and so on in Jewish thought, which is completely bullshit. And I think it is there is a strong commitment of Judaism with ethics. And in a way, it is the same sort of gesture which was done by this huge writer, Chateaubriand. So there is this chapter in the book, there is this meditation of Chateaubriand, on Chateaubriand. There is this this idea that at the end of the day, I try to give to Judaism the same sort of homage which Chateaubriand gave to the Christianity. And Will Murphy, my publisher at Random House, told me, there is a great title for your book. It is, this title is written at the sympathetic ink in so many pages of the book, Genius of Judaism. It will be an homage then, the title, not to Hegel, but to Chateaubriand. I thought it for a few hours, and to change Hegel to Chateaubriand seemed me a good idea. And second question, has been the moderate Islam silenced by the radical Islam? No. It has been targeted by the radical Islam. And we never have to forget that for the moment, till now, those who are on the real front line against radical Islam are the moderate Muslims. The biggest number of victims of radical Islam, of terrorism, of jihadism are Muslims. I'm back from Mosul, as I told you, a few days ago. And I got so many testimonies, so many relations, so many narratives of families who saw, Muslim families, who saw their neighbors, their relatives, tortured, martyred, killed, crucified, not because they were Christians, not because they were Jews, not because they were atheists, but because they were bad Muslims. So this is the situation. So they are targeted. Are they silenced? Sometimes, but thanks God, not always, far from it. And there is an outstanding and admirable number of Muslims who in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Iraq, inside Mosul, in Syria, in Kurdistan, stand bravely, firmly against this plague, this absolute evil, this new fascism, which is radical Islam. And these Muslims, unsilenced, they are our allies, our front line, the vanguard of the battle we wage. They need and they deserve our full support. And I'm sometimes surprised that the same, in particular in this country, who supported so much the dissidents of the Soviet Empire 30 years ago, the dissidents of the Soviet Empire, who extended to them such a brotherly hand. Don't do the same for the, not for the dissidents, but for the minority, the shouting minority, the eloquent minority who fights against this new totalitarianism inside Islam. We should treat them with the same sort of supportive spirit as we did at the time of President Reagan, at the time of President, Kennedy, with those who dissented with the order of stone, of the iron order of the Soviet Union. And we don't. Always, and not enough.
I so agree with you about the Kurds and how brave they are towards fighting ISIS and how we should support them, not only in their fight, but also for their quest for a state. But on the other hand, it so puzzles me that, it so puzzles me that in 1915, the Kurds took such an active role in the Armenian genocide from 1915 till about 1923. Could you help me in any way to understand this better? And do you have any comment on this?
What you say is partly true, not exactly as you say, but we may say that. How can I explain? The real question is not to explain. At this time, they were in the Turkish Empire. They were used by the Ottoman Empire and by the Turks as tools of the mass murder. The real question and the real mystery, and the question of the change, they are not the same. They are not the same, and they did. You have in the Kurdish society a work of memory, a real consideration, a real thinking about these shadows of the past. And there is no people of angels. Every people on earth has its enlightened moments and its moment of darkness. The real question is, are these moments of darkness acknowledged or not? Are they thoroughly thought, or are they repressed in the night of the denial? In the case of the Kurds, they are acknowledged, they are thought, and they stand firmly, not only on the front line of the battlefield when I met them, but also on the front line of their own memory when they have to fight, not with Daesh, but with their own ghosts. And the people able to do that, accepting to face that, is the people who is saved from himself, saved from its part of darkness. And I would like all the peoples of the area do the same work of acknowledgement, of memory, of sorrow, of mourning. And not all of them do that. And one of the problems of the Muslim Arabic world is probably that they deny the part they played in the big world tragedy of after the Armenian genocide, of the Nazism and of the genocide of the Jews. This is a key point. One of the key points of all that we are speaking today is this myth that the fascism, the modern fascism, was reserved to Europe, was a speciality of Europe, that it stopped at the border of Europe, and that the rest of the world, including America, was immune at that. It is not true. there was a fascism in America. Read Philip Roth and see maybe a few elements of the actuality. And there was a fascism in the Arabic world with, as a fruit of it, the Ba'ath regimes in Syria and in Iraq, with the Muslim Brotherhood who was created at the end of the 20s as a reply, a positive reply to the fascism invented in Europe, as a way of gaining the right to be also fascist in an Egyptian way, for example, or Iraqi or Syrian. So this fascism has existed in Arabic world. And the problem begins when this is not recognized. When you entertain the legend of a fascism which does not concern you, the result is that you don't treat it, you don't cure it, you don't face it. And when you don't face it, what happens? It continues to haunt you. You continue to live in the middle of these ghosts, which the Kurds have exorcised, but which very often their Arab neighbors did not. So the real question is that, and then when you express things like that, you are right on the spot of the most burning issues of today.
Two of the many very interesting things that you said seemed somewhat quizzical to me, and I wonder if you would explain them further. At the outset, you described what seemed like almost a duty for a Jew to make him or herself a hostage to the other, which seemed to me to be putting oneself in a position where they wouldn't be able to accomplish very much. And the other quizzical point was your notion that you can always revise the truth. And I wonder whether you would recognize that there are some truths that are not capable of being revised and that are true, or is everything relativistic? Thank you.
No, relativistic, certainly not. And to revise does not mean does not concern the factual truth. You will never find a rabbi in the Talmud saying that France is in America and that America is in Asia, and so on. You will never find a rabbi in the Talmud denying some historical events which have happened and which have their own memory and testimonies and witnesses. So it does not mean these sorts of truth. What it means is the interpretation of the truth is infinite, is endless in a Talmudic point of view. The interpretation, the way, and it goes from big theological, metaphysical question to ordinary question of the life, as you know, if you are familiar to the Talmud of Babylon or of Jerusalem. But certainly not relativism. Certainly not. But for example, the law, the punishments, the way to deal with crimes, the way in which you have a lot of Talmudic discussion saying that the death penalty is impossible. And it is impossible because there is always, in these sort of matters, when the human will is concerned, when the uncertainty of the witness is there is always a risk of doubt. So in these sort of things, yes. Relativism, certainly not. The good and the evil have always been considered as separated. The question is that sometimes they are very close to each other. Sometimes they may exchange their roles. Sometimes they may inhabit together the mind, the brain, the spirit of the same woman or man. Nobody, from a Jewish point of view, nobody can claim to be a pure block of good. And there is probably not pure and absolute blocks of evil. And whoever has tried to go close to the evil knows that what is the most astonishing, the most troubling in the evil is that there is always a part of the mind which escapes to it. This is humanity. I remember when I was in Pakistan investigating about the death of Daniel Pearl, interrogating these Al-Qaeda guys, Yemenite, who did it. It was so strange. They were, of course, embodied evil. They were my worst enemies and the enemies of human gender. And there was always a breach inside. You could guess, you could find the trace, the last spark of humanity. It does not mean that they can be saved, because it's probably not enough. But this mix, unequal, of evil and good in a mind is a fact which defines the human condition. So I believe that, yes. And the other question is what hostage. Hostage is a word of Levinas. It means that to be a human being, a true human being, to escape from the rank of the murderers on one part and of the animality on the other, is to be able to accentuate oneself, not to concentrate on the self, but to accentuate the self in order to be a welcoming heaven for the other. To make oneself able to think as the other, to sit in the place where he is sitting intellectually speaking, to try to sympathize with him when he is cold, when he is hungry, when he is shivering of fear. This capacity of hosting the deepest feelings of the other are probably the root of the humanism. There is a very famous page of Albert Camus when he says, after the Second World War, when there was big discussion in France about the guiltiness of the collaborators of the Nazis. Albert Camus said, at the end of the day, the question was, should they be executed or not? Should they receive the grace which they themselves refused to their victims? And Camus said at the end of the discussion that the biggest crime of these criminals of paper, these criminals on paper who just signed the order to send the Jews to Drancy, to send the resistance to another camp, a German camp, their biggest crime was to have lacked imagination. What Camus said is that they lacked imagination. They did not, the biggest crime was that. Not to have the imagination of the otherness. And I think that lacking imagination is a crime for a human. This sort of imagination, the imagination which does that when you see these cohorts of refugees at the gates of Europe today, the imagination which makes that you can make or not your land a place of hospitality. If you have not imagination, if you are not able to be for 1 minute the hostage of the other, if you are not able for 1 minute to host the other in yourself, you will not host him on your land. And you will not welcome him as a guest in the land of your country. Levinas would probably say that the theory of the otherness, as Levinas develops it, would certainly give a sort of reply to the difficult question of the refugees today in Europe, the question that you know, around this idea of hospitality. Hospitality means two things. It means an infinite moral duty, but it means also that when you say hospitality, you mean that you welcome the person in a definite place, which is yours. Hospitality means that you open the doors of your house as you open the gates of your egoism. This is hospitality. This is consider oneself as the hostage of the other.
Yeah, let's thank Bernard-Henri Lévy.
Thank you, and very happy to be back in Philadelphia, by the way.
Yeah.
12 years after. Thank you.